Good evening, everybody. Wonderful to welcome you and see you again. This is the second of our summer evening lectures. I'm Nick Fisichella. I'm the president and CEO here with Schoodic Institute. We are a conservation science and education nonprofit organization. Together with our National Park Service colleagues, we co-lead Acadia's Research Learning Center. Our role is really to bring the science to help inform stewardship of resources amidst rapid change. And that's from the edge of the sea to the salt marshes and wetlands, through the forests and up to the open summits here in Acadia and beyond. And it's really, again, about our purpose is to really using science in many ways of knowing to help nature amidst rapid change. And I'm really excited for tonight's lecture. And I do want to make sure to thank the corporate sponsor of our summer evening lecture series, which is Bar Harbor Bank and Trust. Thanks to them, we're able to bring this to you. And thanks to all of our supporters, also we're able to really lead this science to inform stewardship here on the coast of Maine. And normally I would next introduce our speaker tonight, but I am unqualified for this role. You really need to have somebody who's much more experienced being out squelching through the mud in the mud flats and combing through the seaweed in the rocky intertidal zone and engaging really the next generation in the science and stewardship of the intertidal and the coast of Maine. So please join me in welcoming our Marine Ecology Director, Hannah Weber.
Thanks. Thanks, Nick. I'm Hannah Weber. I am the Marine Ecology Director here at Schoodic Institute, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Abby Barrows to be with us here tonight. Abby grew up in Deer Isle, not too far away from here, has an undergraduate degree from the University of Tasmania, a master's in philosophy from College of the Atlantic. Abby has been researching marine plastics and microplastics since 2013 globally, and has now, lucky for all of us, brought all of that understanding of microplastics and plastic pollution back to Deer Isle to operate or to incorporate into her oyster farm. And tonight we're going to be hearing about reimagining plastic-based aquaculture, investigating viable alternatives. And with that, please welcome Abby Barrows.
Thank you all for coming out on a July night to listen to a lecture for over an hour. But I'm really excited that you're here. And while I have you, I am excited to talk about microplastics and a little bit in some of my research that has led to me to where I am today in terms of running Deer Isle Oyster Company and trying to reimagine a future free of plastic in our aquaculture systems. So I'm going to breeze through this because I feel like when I started this 15 years ago, no one knew what microplastics are, but a lot of people are very much aware of this ubiquitous pollution that we now are facing. But just so we're all on the same page, microplastics are a pollutant that has emerged as an issue of international concern. They are defined as a piece of plastic between 1 micron and 5 millimeters in size, so like the size of a lentil. It's really important to think of microplastics as a suite or a class of contaminants because they're diverse. They come from many different products and polymer types with the shared characteristics of being non-biodegradable. They absorb, adsorb, and release chemicals. They fragment, but they do not disappear. They come in different shapes, sizes, and colors, with microfibers being the most commonly found. Microplastics have been found in all the world's oceans, from the surface waters to the Mariana Trench, throughout the water column, They've been found in freshwater environments, in our soils, in tap water, and bottled water, in our beverages, in our beer, honey, table salt, sea birds, humans' placentas, breast milk, semen, air. So basically everywhere we have looked, we have found microplastics. All right, so microplastics are divided into two categories. And it's important that we highlight this division because they both have very different regulatory aspects. The primary microplastics are plastics that have been made to be small, made to be micro. So think of things such as these nurdles, which are these plastic pre-production resin pellets that are shipped all over the world and then melted down with chemicals added into them and molded into everyday household products. Microbeads are these small pieces of plastic that are added into personal care and pharmaceuticals, such as face wash or toothpaste or exfoliants. They're also used as a filler and also help with slow release of medications. They're now banned in many countries, but both of these microplastics enter the environment through spills in the case of nurdles or through our household wastewater in the case of the personal care products. The secondary microplastics are the predominant type of microplastics that we find in our environment. So these are small pieces of plastic that come from larger pieces fragmenting, such as fishing line, gear, bottles, bags, tires, textiles. And this happens through mechanical and physical degradation over time and chemical degradation. A significant contributor to secondary microplastics seems to be our clothing. So each time we wear, wash, or dry our synthetics, they shed into the environment, in the water, and in the air. And each washing machine cycle can release tens of thousands of microfibers, and they result in an estimated 500,000 metric tons of microplastics from synthetic clothing ending up in the sea every year. So unfortunately, when microplastics are consumed either directly out of the environment or indirectly through consuming prey that contain plastic, the toxicants from and on plastic can leach into the animal and find a permanent place in the food web. We have also discovered that microplastics, as is well documented now, can move through the blood membrane barrier and enter into different body systems in humans and in animals. Studies have shown associated behavior changes, reduced reproduction, energy uptake, and diminished offspring performance in animals that have ingested microplastics. Ingestion can have long-term individual, population, and community-level impacts that we're still just beginning to understand. It's estimated that we're probably, again, these are pretty wild numbers. It really depends on where you are in the world, but it is estimated that we're eating around 1/2 pound of microplastics and breathing in probably around 1/2 pound of microplastics each year. And the impacts of microplastic exposure on mortality, morbidity, and reproductive success of species is continuing to be investigated. There's just a lot of other factors that we have to look at that are confounded by ingesting plastic. Ultimately, this is really concerning because we don't understand the long-term effects of ingesting microplastics on either human or animal health. So back in 2015, quite a long time ago, I did a food web study at what is now the Shaw Institute. We analyzed 51 mussels, which were rope grown, 51 wild mussels, oysters, clams, lobsters, and mackerel. We found microplastics in 96% of the seafood samples. And on average, the number of microplastics per gram of tissue across all the species was about 2.5 pieces. Lobster and mackerel had more of the larger sizes, whereas the bivalve had more of the smaller pieces. And so although microplastics research has been really fast moving over the last 15 years, or decade really, there continues to be a lot of questions. And so one of the first steps in furthering my understanding at that time was looking at how we collected and quantified microplastics in the marine environment. So in Blue Hill Bay, I conducted a field comparison study of 2 different sampling techniques. The paper demonstrates that the traditional and most often used sampling technique for microplastics, which is a surface plankton net there on the bottom right-hand side, gave a density estimate of microplastics that was 3 orders of magnitude lower than this grab sample technique shown on the left-hand side there, which is basically just a liter of water that you scoop up using a bottle. So relying solely on the Newston tow samples would have resulted in a gross underestimation of the amount of microplastics in the sea surface. Also, the grab technique easily lends itself to citizen science because it's easy to build in quality controls, which is we found really, really important in this field of study, and also has a simple protocol, and the equipment is affordable. A Newston net runs in the thousands of dollars. So now that I had the solid methodology, this is back in 2016, I wanted to learn more about the sources, composition, and distribution of microplastic pollution in oceans, rivers, lakes, and streams worldwide. So I approached and partnered with Adventure Scientists, which is a nonprofit organization based in Bozeman, Montana. We launched the Global Microplastics Initiative, and then we expanded that initiative into global freshwater environments, and also began a 2-year study in the Gallatin watershed in Montana. They primarily managed the citizen scientists, and I ran all other aspects of the project out of a lab in downtown Stonington. At the project's conclusion, we made a short video, and that's going to explain a little bit more about the organization and the project. Also, during this time, I purchased the oyster farm, but I will be getting to that in a little bit. "5 years ago, we scooped up a ½ liter of water locally, brought it back to the Institute. Looking under the microscope and seeing all these technicolored pieces of plastic led me to think of all of these larger questions. How is it affecting the ocean? Our drinking water? Are microplastics everywhere? But I couldn't answer those on my own. So this is when I partnered with Adventure Scientists. Adventure Scientists is a nonprofit organization that unites explorers and scientists to solve some of the world's most pressing environmental issues in which access to data is crucial to resolving them. I worked with Adventure Scientists to train adventurers who would be collecting data for me around the world.
I'm about to take a microplastic sample.
I was able to get water samples from the Antarctic and the middle of the Pacific.
We're going to send this into the labs.
Through the process of working with Adventure Scientists, I was getting closer to understanding the magnitude of this issue. After analyzing thousands of samples from around the world, we concluded that 74% of them contain microplastic pollution. Microplastics are one of the largest pollution problems that you've never seen. Without Adventure Scientists, I would have never been able to even dream about this breadth of data that I've been able to collect. The Adventure Scientist model lends itself to so many different projects, whether it be microplastics or forestry conservation or animal protection. This is just the beginning. So based on survey results from the adventurers, 80% of our volunteers then went on to take steps to address plastic or microplastic pollution in their own communities. And to me, that was such a powerful thing with them engaging with the project. Also, we've gone on to have our data used by governments all over the world for setting up marine protected areas or addressing drinking water. The World Health Organization has used our data. So this data set continues to live on, and it's open source. Anyone can access this data through the Adventure Scientist website, and I love seeing that it's continuing to be used. So each point on this map is where a 1 liter surface grab sample was collected by an Adventure Scientist. The size of the bubble is relates to how much plastic was found in it, and the color relates to whether it was present or absent. So the yellow means there's no plastic in the samples, and the orange means there was plastic found. It's really also important for me working with citizen scientists that we had samples that weren't contaminated because later research showed that so many people are contaminating the samples as they're trying to collect. And so for me, having this large amount of samples that also came up plastic free were really important for my quality assurance. We collected over 2,400 samples, 1,300 of those in the marine environment, where we averaged about 12 pieces of plastic per liter of seawater. In the fresh water, it was a much lower average with about 1.5 piece per liter. 90% of the microplastics that we quantified as microfibers, so those hair-like pieces of plastic. The majority of those were invisible to the naked eye, so less than 1.5 millimeters in size, which is a smaller size than those captured in the majority of the surface studies using that Newston tow net because they slip through that net. For the marine findings, we collected samples from every ocean on the planet, including coastal environments and understudied ocean regions. And the data showed that microplastic concentration is higher in the open oceans than the coastal environments, which was a little surprising to me, with the highest concentrations found in the polar oceans. And this has further been validated by many other studies. Spatially, as you can see, it's very diverse, and that's a little bit due to that type of sampling that we're doing, just a small water sample. During this time, I also went on to do a study on the Hudson River where we collected over 142 samples over 10 days. And we found that half of the fibers that we found, it was almost all microfibers that we found, were plastic, while the other half were non-plastic but of anthropogenic origin. Captain Rachel Miller, who runs the Rosalia Project. I don't know if people are familiar with the Rosalia Project. They sail up and down the coast of Maine all summer. She's also a Nat Geo explorer. And from this research, they developed the Cora ball, which is this ball that you put in your washing machine with the idea that's helping capture some of those microfibers that come out when we wash our synthetic clothing. This is a heat map of where we sampled all of our locations and the average microfibers per liter at each sample location. I really was hoping that this would be this like gorgeous map of like no plastics way up at Lake Tier of the Clouds because it's like a 3-day hike in there to like, you know, bright red once you hit New York City. It didn't reflect any of that. There's no relationship between fiber abundance, wastewater treatment plant location, or population density. But it did show us that the Hudson River watershed drainage area contributes an average of 300 million anthropogenic microfibers into the Atlantic Ocean every day. I also did a small study on plastic contamination in bottled drinking water for the nonprofit called The Story of Stuff, which is a West Coast-based nonprofit. I looked at 19 different brands that were shipped to me from all over the country. 18 of the 19 brands contained particles with about an average of 8 microplastics per liter of bottled water. At the same time, a larger international study was going on over 9 different countries with a much larger sample size, and they found microplastics in 93% of the bottled water, also with an average of about 10 microplastics per liter of water. And one brand contained over 10,000 pieces. So in general, bottled water contains about 22 times more plastic than tap water. I went on to do a lot of different field research, applying those techniques that I learned and had taught to the adventurers all over the world, and had a lot of opportunities to contribute to that global data set myself, which I felt kept, you know, not only got me out of the lab, it also kept me sharp in terms of what people were experiencing in the field, and allowed me to better hone our protocols so they were really user-friendly and adaptable to any sampling location, whether that be on a sailboat or from shore or from an iceberg. I also had the chance to do a multi-matrix study in Alaska on the Prince William Sound, also called Glacier Alley. The methodology was based on ongoing Arctic research with some Canadian colleagues, and so I synced my protocols with theirs with the hope that we could have a larger data set and help round out some of that Arctic food web study. A lot of those samples are still being processed. We looked at sediment along the glaciers there, ice, water, and grizzly bear scat. The grizzly bear scat has sat in my freezer for a couple of years before that got shipped out. Luckily, power outages weren't a problem in terms of keeping it nice enough to process. But the good thing with plastic is that it doesn't go bad. Part of the study, as just a humbling moment, is I had this great idea from my desk in Stonington that I wanted to sample salmon gut. And so this was, still during the pandemic. And so we had to pivot and make some changes to the study last minute. And I'm like, great, we're going to go to Alaska. The salmon are running. I'm going to go up there and I'll catch some salmon. I'll look at their guts and see what they're eating. And this really plugs into the grizzly bear piece. Turns out salmon don't really eat when they're spawning. There's nothing in their gut, which someone could have told me. But I got there, cutting them open and being like, oh, they're totally empty. And if I had been looking at the nanoparticle side, that might have been different. But that was very, eye-opening to me to design the study and then actually get in the field and realize that it didn't make any sense. But someday I'll go back and do that study when they're not spawning. I got to travel with National Geographic and Lindblad expeditions to the Antarctic Peninsula, and the project was to assess the atmospheric load of microplastics across the Drake Passage, so that passage of land from Ushuaia to the peninsula there, and also see how tourism may be contributing to local microplastic pollution, both from the boats and the clothing that people are wearing, because it's all synthetic. So I did that through proximal air and water sampling. Because at this point, I really had learned that a lot of microplastics that we were finding in some of these very remote water samples were airborne, and they weren't downstream from something. So I collected 24 water samples and used this stepped filtration system, so a little different than those grab samples, because I wanted to have those filters. I wasn't allowed to take water away from Antarctica. They have very strict policies there, but I can take filters. I also did onshore air samples on the boat as we traveled across the Drake Passage, on the bow, stern, and inside. And our findings show the need for the tourism industry to really adopt mitigation strategies and offer an effort to reduce contamination in Antarctica and similar remote regions. That publication is in process, and we're doing a lot of modeling, looking at the air, because that Drake Passage piece was really intriguing and pretty sobering to see how much plastic is moving through that very remote stretch of water. All right, I also had a chance to go to Raja Ampat, which is in eastern Indonesia, and that was hosted by the Oceanic Society in collaboration with Plastic Pollution Coalition, the Drifters Project, and partially funded by SC Johnson. We had a 10-day expedition, and we were in one of the most biodiverse marine regions on Earth, the Coral Triangle. And most of the islands in that area are uninhabited, and much of it is marine protected area. So I was really eager to get there and see what sort of plastic contamination there was. I came on this trip to sample microplastics in the water column and also sample for atmospheric microplastics as we travel around the remote areas of Raja Ampat. There's a lot of questions that we still have about how the wind and air currents are transporting microplastics around the world. So for testing air, we have an air sampler on the bow of the boat, and the idea is that that is collecting an environmental sample that's unfettered by any of the contamination coming from the boat. Then we have a midship sample up on the mast, so that is probably getting some of the environment and some contamination from the boat. And then we have a sample on the stern, potentially sampling all the stuff that can be coming off the boat and into the natural environment. So with these three stations, we'll have a comparative study between the different areas on the boat, and also a snapshot of what's happening here in Raja Ampat in terms of microplastic pollution in the air. So I'd done a similar study in terms of the bow, mast, and stern of the ship that I had done in Antarctica. It was a really inconclusive study. It has very, very low contamination levels, which was great on many, for the environment. But I was there scratching my head wondering if the heat somehow affected how things adhered to my samples, my sample collectors. And it was really difficult to discern any patterns or draw any conclusions from that study. There were some differences in the particle morphology and the material type across the different matrices, so the water and the air, and the sites. But it really highlighted the need to further evaluate microplastics in this area to better understand sources, the environmental abundance, and the fate. The other theory I had is that so much of the water samples were low concentrations, which was great, but also my thought was that maybe because there was so much biodiversity that those were taken up in a lot of the life that was dwelling in those areas. I suspect that the numbers we quantified actually do not reflect the true microplastic abundance in these areas of Raja Ampat due to other studies that have showed much higher numbers. Guess I'll have to go back. All right, so right now, and a few years ago, I started a PHA degradation study with 5 gyres. PHA is a polyhydroxide alkylate, a sugar-based bioplastic. And they're a polyester essentially produced in nature by microorganisms. And they can be combined with different monomers to give the material extremely different properties. So they were sort of heralded as this new green chemistry alternative to traditional oil-based plastics. And despite the growing interest in biopolymer alternatives to conventional plastics, adoption has been hindered through regulatory uncertainty, misinformation, and limited field data on real-world end-of-life fragmentation and biodegradation of these bioplastics. So I've been working with 5 gyres, as I mentioned, on this better alternatives list, and it aims to close these knowledge gaps by systematically evaluating the end-of-life behavior of biopolymers across multiple sectors and environments. So the Better Alternatives 3.0 list is available, and we worked on that study probably 2 years ago now. And that was almost a 2-year study that we looked at degradation rates in terrestrial and marine environments. And now we're in the midst of doing a Better Alternatives 4.0 test for the next 12 months. We're 2 months in, and we are doing the study in Maine and in Florida and in California. And we're all have all the same samples and doing triplicates and taking things out for analysis at the same time. And we're also looking at different polymer types, so natural polymers such as bamboo and cellulose, and food service items such as utensils, films, cups, bowls, smoking-related materials such as cigarette butts, and other consumer goods such as toys and personal care items. As you probably all have noticed, there's a plethora of compostable or oxy-biodegradable plastics out there that you are anywhere you go at a food service. Just the straw that my daughter had on the way here, where I was like, "Don't take the straw." She's like, "Look, it's paper." But just having a better understanding, because as a consumer, it is so confusing to know what is the right step to take with some of these products. And so we will be testing that and really just ground truthing what that looks like. And this round of studies, we have added one more component. We have home compostable bins, because there's a lot of products saying like, "Oh, these are home compostable." We have found that a lot of them are not home compostable. And so this study, I'm hoping, will bust some of those myths. So we have a home compostable, we have terrestrial, and then we have marine, and we'll be taking those out at 3, 6, and 12 months and seeing how well they have actually degraded. And there's a very short film clip done a couple years ago for Outside TV, and I worked with Sasha DeJulian, who's this really awesome rock climber, and she helped highlight some of this work. And it's just been great to work with people who have different platforms to sort of get some of this awareness out there.
That's not as dramatic as I thought it would be. The coastline of Maine is beautiful, rugged, and host to an impressive ecosystem that the people who live here care for. You are like the most badass person I've ever met. Erin and I are going to meet up to learn how Abby and other local businesses are trying to protect their home state through sustainable practices, science, and aquaculture.
You can watch that on Outside TV if you want. I also realized I should have pointed out what these very hard to see photos are. On the right-hand side, this is how we have sunk our materials to the ocean floor in the lobster pound that we're using as our study site in Deer Isle. And so we have put a range of heavy things on them, and we'll sink them down, and we will haul those up at those different time periods. And over there on the left, it's hard to see, but that's sort of the idea. This is the bioplastics that are sort of scattered on the ground with loose compost or like mulch thrown over them to try to simulate what would, something that would be discarded on the roadside. All right, so I'm sure you've noticed a theme here that all of the environment and plastics have some interconnectedness. And it's just really important to understand that every single step of plastic production, from extraction to disposal, contributes to greenhouse gases. Plastics are a climate change issue. We know microplastics influence complex microbial communities taking part in such emissions. Also, from all of these global studies, we now know that plastics generally low density means that these fragments can easily be picked up by the winds and blown around the world. We know that areas that are more arid have a lot more microplastics that are airborne. Areas that are more wet and humid have a lot more plastics that have settled on the ground and then are washed down into different waterways or groundwater. We also know that airborne microplastics can absorb and scatter sunlight and ultimately influence temperatures on the Earth's surface. We know that polar sea ice can act as a sink and can release them in large quantities into the ocean as they melt, as the glaciers melt and sea ice melts. They can interrupt biological carbon pumps in our ocean by affecting phytoplankton and zooplankton. A lot of this atmospheric deposition of microplastics is very new science, and the conclusions are really tricky. We always want a smoking gun, but it's not as simple as that, because unlike other aerosols, microplastics come in all those different shapes, sizes, and colors. And it appears that microplastics could have localized cooling and warming effects depending on how they vary from place to place and what their concentrations are. So it's not as easy as some of the other air pollutants and aerosols that have sort of been dealt with particular legislation. So changing gears, how is this all connected? For me, it made a lot of sense. A lot of people are like, what are you doing farming oysters when you know that there's plastics in the ocean? But for me, connecting water quality with my work at the Shaw Institute, to plastic pollution, to climate change, to fisheries growing up in Stonington, and farming, spending a lot of time overseas farming, it really felt like a natural progression for me. So during my global research, I had this opportunity to buy an oyster farm in Deer Isle. And after a few years of a very sharp learning curve, as I had no business background or aquaculture background, I began to integrate my passion for reducing plastic pollution into research and development on my oyster farm gear cultivation. So we aquaculturists love to say that our work doesn't just do no harm for the environment, but actively does good. Seaweed sequesters carbon, shellfish filter the water, increasing clarity, helping marine plants thrive, creating nursery grounds for fish. Discarded shells combat ocean acidification and form new habitats for crabs and worms and other shellfish, and how eating these species that are low on the food chain are one of the most responsible sources of protein to feed a growing human population. All of this is true, and yet we rely on plastics for the entire life cycle of oyster cultivation, which we know can have lasting environmental impacts. Every step, as I've said, of plastic production, from extraction, use, to disposal, contributes to greenhouse gases and leaves behind a toxic legacy. Plastic was never designed to be recycled. It is still, unfortunately, not designed to be recycled. We are recycling less than 9% of it globally, and less than 5% of that is recycled more than once. Almost all plastic has the same end of life. It's landfilled, burned, or lost to the environment. But I get why plastic has been so quickly and thoroughly integrated into our working waterfront. It's lightweight, it's durable, it's cheap, and it holds up to salt water. But I think as a material, it is working directly against what we're trying to do as aquaculturists and stewards of our local waters. But there is a growing group of folks dedicated to thinking about creative alternatives and repurposing of plastic gear, as well as doing some true recycling of what we have in our hands now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work I've been doing to reimagine what aquaculture could look like without plastic. So in 2021, I got a small amount of funding to start research and development of alternative materials for growing oysters in single floating mesh bags. So it's on the left-hand side here. We began to identify durable, competitive, viable, and ecologically friendly materials for aquaculture systems, focusing on oysters. And at the most basic level, our goal was to figure out what materials were best for the job in performance, supply, scalability, and that also met our non-toxic goals. I didn't want to change how we grew oysters, just what we grew them in. We collaborated with partner farms up and down the Maine coast to do side-by-side trials with plastic and non-plastic gear to compare oyster growth. We didn't find any significant difference. Additionally, we had them collect bi-monthly abiotic data, so temperature and salinity, and information on how the gear handled and held up using a really basic rating system, just because each oyster farm has a lot of different environmental pressures. For our gear, we started with cedar frames, basalt mesh, and cork floats for our bags. The birds loved them. They tore holes in the mesh up there in the top right-hand corner, and the cork became waterlogged over time. Then we tried stainless steel mesh bags in the bottom left-hand corner. They were functional, but they were very heavy. Then came the myco buoys, mushroom buoys grown on hemp chaff, inoculated with mycelium. They looked beautiful. There's the picture in the middle there. They floated. They biodegraded just a little too quickly. They couldn't quite make it through a season. So we focused on coatings to increase their longevity. We tried pine tar, that's the bottom right-hand corner there. We tried linseed oil, nanocellulose, crushed oyster shells, soy-based paints. Nothing really held up. We had some really epic failures. Let's just say we have unintentionally seeded the cove with a lot of oysters. But each failure left us with a little more knowledge, which we were then able to apply directly. We expanded our prototypes to be better compatible with farms configured to the 4 or 6 bay ranch culture. We refined our design, we crossed materials off the list, and explored new approaches. And that's what has led us to aluminum. It's lightweight, it's durable, and unlike plastic, it is actually recyclable, truly recyclable. A few manufacturers in the oyster world have been using aluminum components for gear, and we saw real potential. Our latest prototype is mostly aluminum, so I'm going to explain what this is in a moment. This welded pontoon style flotation that has threaded caps, which holds up a multi-bay infrastructure for cedar frames, aluminum bags with natural rubber closures, manila rope connecting the whole thing to the surface line. So I'm just going to pause for a moment because I realize a lot of people don't actually know what an oyster farm looks like. They might see the buoys out there, but oysters are farmed in a lot of different ways. Here in New England, we mostly use surface culture. And so the oysters are grown on the surface of the ocean. And that means the infrastructure is 2 moorings, chain, rope to a mooring ball. That mooring ball has another line that connects to the other mooring ball, and then you repeat that. So you have this infrastructure that you really are only seeing the top of, but there's all the stuff underwater that's holding this farm together. And then you clip bags onto that surface line. And so those bags can either be a 6-bay ranch like this, or a cage, as some people call them, that can fit 6 different bags in it, or those single mesh bags that I showed you a few slides back. Traditionally, all of that is plastic, and so I'm really been focusing on the gear, surface gear, to try to change that. The way you tend those gear is by pulling a boat up to that line and pulling those bags on board. Realize a lot of people don't, I had no idea what an oyster farm looked like until I was out on the one I had purchased. So I tried to take a moment to explain that, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end about that. The other thing, the reason that we wanted these aluminum pontoons, those are the buoys that not only float the bag, but right now it's in the drying position. The pontoons are in the water, and if there were oyster bags in that, they would be air drying, which is another important thing that people use to control fouling and pests on their oysters. And so they can air dry up for 24 hours to dry and kill everything but the oysters. And then you can flip that back over, and the pontoons are on the top and the oysters are back in the water. The reason we care about threaded caps is because of Maine winter. I don't know who was here this winter, but those of you who were here, it was a real winter. We had 16 inches of ice over the lobster pond. And so we sink our entire farm to the seafloor in the winter. And in order to do that with this sort of apparatus, you need to have weights, or in this case, you can take the caps off the pontoons, fill it with seawater, and let it sink gently down to the ocean floor. And then those pontoons not only act as weights, they act as feet that keep the oysters out of the mud. So we are now testing for durability, corrosion, because if there's any other metals around, there's a lot of electrolysis that happens. Looking at oyster growth, comparing oysters in plastic gear versus non-plastic gear, while continuing to experiment with some different materials for the bag. We haven't quite cracked the code on that. This past winter, we focused on testing the placement and the size of different anodes to help reduce that corrosion. And we've also been looking at ways to decrease the reactivity of metal in seawater. And so soon we'll test metal cables to replace the plastic rope as part of the farm infrastructure, because ropes, we know, shed a lot of microfibers into the ocean. I'm still pretty stubbornly trying to make some of these micro buoys work. So we're trying to test out some new range, host of coatings for the buoys, because I really see them, see a high potential for these to replace some of our marker buoys and some of our less structural buoys out in the farm, and for other applications. People who have their boat in the water for 3 months, they could use that as their mooring buoy, or other fisheries applications for toggles. We're working with Prowl Design Studio, which is a San Francisco-based studio, and they are helping us explore new and innovative coatings. And this table just shows some of the latest coatings that we've been doing over the winter and now into the summer. So some off-the-shelf things. This Kiam is a mineral-based paint, tung oil mixed with different UV stabilizers to help reduce the UV radiation and degradation, mixing calcium carbonate, so back to some of those oyster shells mixed in, and then kaolin, which is a clay. Our carbonate is this really neat powder that has held up fairly well. And then some of the Caranuba wax, which we melt and then dip the buoys in. So here are some of the microbuoy coating trials. These are buoys that have been in the water for 2 months. And so we record how long it takes to coat them, because that needs to be assessed, how long it takes to cure them, how heavy the buoys are. And once they're deployed, we monitor their durability and weight bi-monthly, and also collect some of that abiotic data. We will see how these do. So it turns out that research and development in the ocean is really hard, especially when you're also trying to run a business and grow it. It turns out it's a many-year process. But the success and the workability of our prototypes this past year shows that we have come a really long way, and we're close to being able to produce gear that can work for farmers. Now we're looking at ways to streamline the build out of the bags and decrease the costs in both material and in labor. This season, we've been slowly testing the proof of concept. We've been building, or we're in the process of building from the moorings up, what I'm trying to have be the first fully plastic-free oyster farm. So no plastic ropes, no plastic buoys. Turns out the buoys are still the big challenge. And we have a new 4.5-acre lease that I'm hoping to do this on. We also hope to have open source gear design available by the end of the season or into the winter, and potentially be in the position to take orders from or act as a liaison for other farms interested in migrating to or integrating plastic-free gear into their operations. The goal is to have plastic-free gear be a real financial and accessible option for sea farmers, because this is only going to work for the industry if it's financially feasible. Also, we've been diversifying the species we're growing. We are trying polyculture because we know that in the natural environment, monoculture, a monocrop on a farm, it's not really great for the environment. And so not only is it good for business and smart for business to diversify, but it also makes a lot of sense if we can grow kelp that we can feed to urchins that then can also graze on fouled oysters in the winter. It feels like this, just the smart ecosystem move to do. It's also been really fun to work with some different species. The other things we've been doing to move away from plastic and fossil fuels and other aspects of the business have been adding metal boats to our fleet. So we have a welded aluminum landing craft without bottom paint, because paint is plastic. And most bottom paint is designed to be ablative, which means it sheds directly into the environment that you are boating in. And so I know we don't have a lot of great alternatives out there, but this felt like a pretty relatively easy pivot to reduce our paint use out on the farm. We also know that microplastic from paints are one of the more abundant things found in harbors. We're also moving to slowly store oysters in wooden crates versus the plastic lobster crates that you see everywhere. You know, not very long ago, these were all up and down the Maine coast, the wooden crates, and we have the wood, we have the ability to build those. We've also been selling oysters in these great home compostable, truly home compostable bags from cellulose by Ocean Farm Supply, which is a Southern Maine company. They also have produce bags and things like that. So those black bags on the left-hand side is what we sell all of our wholesale oysters in. We've also been using migrating to as much electric as possible on the farm, both on and off the water. So out on the farm, on the left-hand side, is our solar-powered tumbler. A tumbler, if you don't know, is something that most oyster farms have in order to curate that beautiful teardrop-shaped oyster that everyone's very familiar with. As a farmer, it's the way we prune our oysters. We basically dump our oysters through this tube. It circulates, tumbles, and not only does it sort them by size, we have different size holes in the tube, it also chips off that new growth and really makes a robust shell and a really nice meat to shell ratio for the oyster. So that's 100% solar. If you can't tell, we built it ourselves. But it's worked really well, and it's much nicer to work next to as a worker as well. And it also runs all of our washdown pumps. So all of our oysters are washed out on the float using salt water. We also have this amazing electric truck that we use for all of our deliveries. And in the back of this electric truck is a shred cube, which is a solar-powered refrigerated cube that is powered by a Thermo King refrigerator and solar panels, so that we're able to run that year-round and deliver our oysters using the sun, which feels kind of like a jab because we're keeping them cold with the sun. The idea is that little by little, every part of our operation will align with the stewardship that we're trying to have out in the water. So the ocean is going to keep humbling us, but that's okay, because I feel like if you aren't making mistakes, you're probably not learning. And my vision is to continue to push the boundaries of what it means to run a business in the ocean and to innovate without compromise and to design the sea's future in mind. And as a farmer, a steward, and a scientist, I really refuse to accept that the ocean must pay the price for our lack of imagination. It might be challenging, but we can do better, and we need to do better for the future of our industry and for the future of our oceans. So thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome. I believe we are going to take questions. And I think I had a couple of people who were going to run microphones. Awesome. Do you have the microphone? Okay, Isabel. So Isabel and Claire will be taking questions. And Nick, you're monitoring questions online? Awesome. Any questions from anybody here in the room?
Thank you for your awesome work. I want to know what you know about the little pods that all my natural, less polluting dishwashing detergent comes in, and it's plastic, right?
That's a great question. The Shaw Institute actually has done an extensive study on the pods, and I think shed some light on the toxins associated with some of the PHA and PLA plastics, bioplastics that are being touted as, they go away. You don't see them. And so I would encourage you to look at some of that latest research. But most, not to be a downer, but I would say most things that are touted as being bioplastic or they're fully biodegradable and they're containing some sort of soap or something like that. I have yet to see something that I would stand behind, although every day I feel like there's some great innovation that's happening around alternative materials that are not made with the same mix of chemicals that traditional plastic have been made with. Did that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, can I ask two? Early on that slide, you showed your sampling. There was the yellow dots were all in the line in the Pacific that we think of as where El Nino and La Nina mess around. There's also the Pacific plastic garbage patch. I just sort of seemed odd to me that you're getting all clean samples there. And the other one is, can you speak about the ablative bottom paints? Do you have anybody got any statistics on actually how much plastic is being dumped off every time we launch our boat and move it around all summer? I suppose it's better than heavy metals though, right?
Well, some of them
Remains to be seen, maybe.
A lot of them are made with heavy metals. Actually, I'll address the second question first. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a comprehensive study quantifying a 12-foot boat or 32-foot boat and how many gallons of paint go on there and how much comes off each season. But we do know that most boats need to be re-bottom painted every year. So that tells you something about how much is shedding off. There are some, less nasty bottom paints. For me as an oyster farmer, when I still have an old fiberglass boat, I use the non-copper based ones because copper is toxic to shellfish. But it's a little bit of the lesser of evils. But if someone wants to do a PhD, there's a bunch of young people here. There's a lot of opportunity for study and better understanding some of these run-of-the-mill mainstream products that we use and what those repercussions might be short and long term. This is what you're talking about, across the southern North Atlantic there. So that was an incredible connection I had with the Atlantic Rally Cruisers sailing race. And a lot of those contain plastic. So that orange is, oh, the South Pacific, sorry. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, so I was a little surprised, but again, the gyres really shift. So for those of you who are not aware, there's 5 major gyres in our oceans: North Atlantic, South Pacific, North Pacific, and the Indian Ocean. And that's what people have called the garbage patch, but it's really just a convergence zone where plastics get trapped. And so I think the South Pacific, again, some of those plastics are just below the surface. And so they might have been missing them with the scoops, or maybe just where the gyre was at that time was not exactly where they were.
What does microplastic do with oysters?
That's a great question, which a lot of people have asked me. There have been a lot of studies on oysters and microplastic, and there's been a lot of studies on seafood and microplastic, and that's one of the reasons why they get a bad rap, because they have been the most studied. Oysters are found to ingest some microplastics. They really prefer a very small size range, so like stuff we can't see with our eyes. Think of like the phytoplankton that they're feeding on. And they have a really great ability to sort what they eat and what they don't eat. So they actually ingest a lot of what they're pulling in the water, and they spit it out and they don't want it. But they also do take in some of that plastic. But they have found through a lot of different laboratory studies that a lot of that plastic passes through the oyster and doesn't actually stay in the oyster for very long. We're not sure why that is, but it seems like a lot of the bivalves actually have the ability to not hold on to the microplastic in their belly. They poop it out. And so that to me is heartening, but I also know that they're in water that's probably fairly full of microplastics. So they're probably passing it through their body fairly constantly, but probably no less than just standing in a carpeted room in terms of how much we're getting in our bodies. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Hi, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing some of your research and experience. My question is about, you mentioned a lot of different materials that are in play. Do you have an opinion on paper? Like as a product that to make for packaging?
I think that using anything that can come from a renewable source is a step in the right direction. But I think the overarching question we need to be asking is, one, do we need it? And two, is there something reusable that we could be thinking of using it as an alternative? That throwaway culture, I think, is why we're a little bit in the problem that in the mess that we're in right now. But yeah, anything that's not going to leave this toxic legacy, and that's the problem with plastics. Even when we're done with it, it's still polluting our environment.
So let's say we figure out where all the plastic's coming from and we stop introducing it. Because plastic doesn't biodegrade and it doesn't seem like it's getting picked up by things, how long will we be living with it?
That's not, I don't know if I can answer that question, but a lot of folks are saying we are now in the Plasticine era. And so when we look back in geological time, it'll be we have done a great job of coating the entire Earth in plastic. And time will tell, but we really know it persists. And so that's why I feel like it's so important to have action now, and also to look upstream and turn off that tap of what's coming down. You know, we're producing there's over 8 million metric tons of plastic entering our ocean every year, and we're producing, I don't know, over 500 billion tons of plastic, and that's only slotted to increase. So it's pretty sobering to think about where we're going to be in even 10 years from now. And I don't think it's going anywhere too fast.
A question about I trap green crabs, and my traps all are the wire covered with plastic, which is what the lobster folk use. Is there an alternative to that, or is anybody coming up with that?
That's something I think about all the time. The alternative for trapping green crabs, I don't know what scale you're doing it at. I've trapped a lot of green crab in my day. I would think about maybe going back to some of the wooden traps for that application. To wooden traps, back in the 80s, and a lot of the old guys still have the jigs for making them. I know that I've talked to a lot of commercial lobstermen, a lot of them wouldn't consider going back to wooden traps after using the plastic coated wire, but that's just because the way the boats are set up. All of these things are set up for the system they have now in play. But wire and ocean water and durability are something I think about a lot. And I've looked at powder coating wires to, use all the same infrastructure that we have for lobster traps. I just haven't found something that's going to be cost effective enough that we could do it at a scale that would make a difference. But maybe you're not asking that. But you could look at wooden traps and also crab pots. All in Europe, they do a lot out of wicker and different like lath, so wood again. But there's a lot of designs out there that are pretty effective in capturing crabs.
This is similar to the switching back to wooden traps, but do you look at the history of oyster farming or other aquaculture, like pre-plastic, as inspiration for materials to go back to?
Yes, so in 2021, that was part of our deep dive that we realized we needed a lot more than a year and a lot more than the funding that we had for the project. But I did a deep dive looking over in Asia and looking at what people are doing over in Europe and have done over in Europe. The crux there is that we are farming oysters or Eastern oysters in a way that is pretty different from what has been done traditionally. In Southeast Asia, for the pearl oysters, they use a lot of bamboo rafts, but they're not trying to grow them on the half shell market. Same in Japan, they do these long ropes that, traditionally were probably jute or something, manila, and then they would use shells to have oysters settle on them. Again, that's not a half shell market. They just are shucking them for the meats. And so I did learn a lot through that process, but unfortunately I couldn't find things that were really applicable to how we farm here in North America today. Although I do think that some of the bamboo and some of those renewable materials could have a place somewhere on a farm.
Are microplastics in plants, do they get sucked up from the soil?
Yeah, and yes, in short, yes. And they're definitely on the surface of a lot of plants too. And the soils we're now finding, there's more and more research on soils. It's been a hard thing to study just because of the laboratory processes, but we're finding that soils are now a sink for a lot of plastics. We think about organic gardening leans so heavily on using plastics as a weed control, right? Black plastic, and a lot of that we know fragments and ends up in the soil. And then as that fragments into smaller and smaller pieces, so think of nanoplastics below 1 micron, those are taken up through the cells.
Thank you very much for what you've been doing. Is there anybody else doing any kind of the research on oyster gear that you're doing anywhere else in the world? Are they doing it down under? Or?
I really wish there were.
Yeah, yeah. I know Oyster Grove still has aluminum.
Yes.
Aluminum cages, but plastic floats.
Yep. Oyster Grow, Outlaw Oyster here in North America. Unfortunately, all the folks down in Australia and New Zealand are very, very plastic forward. Adam Campbell out on North Haven has been experimenting with some of the similar types of designs and working with smaller cedar cages. But no, I keep on waiting for someone to walk out of a room or walk up to me at a conference and be like, "Oh, have you met this person? They've already designed this." That is yet to happen, but I'm hopeful, and I'm hoping that also through conversations and talking about plastics and aquaculture systems and plastics in our food systems, that either it will unearth someone who's been thinking about this as well, or it will help inspire more folks to roll up their sleeves and think about alternative materials that we could be using.
Thank you. Abby, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and I'm going to hand it over to Grace to close the show.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. That was such an inspiring and informative evening. I want to extend another big thank you to Abby for her presentation tonight and also for the work she does to get our marine economy back on track for a plastic-free future. I also want to thank all of you in the audience, whether here in person or viewing online, for attending. Your participation tonight supports our mission of inspiring science, learning, and community for a changing world. Lastly, this free event would not be possible without the generous sponsorship from Bar Harbor Bank and Trust. We hope to see you join more programs this summer and fall. Next month, our summer events season at the Schoodic Institute campus continues with the Trees of Acadia free summer lecture series talk and a main outdoor film festival screening. So on August 11th, Schoodic Institute Science Communication Specialist Catherine Schmidt and a panel of ecologists and writers will present on the Trees of Acadia, the past, present, and future of park forests. Meanwhile, the Outdoor Film Festival returns to Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park on August 27th for a family-friendly evening of outdoor adventure and conservation films under the stars. I highly suggest you check out the list of films this year on our website because it's a really interesting lineup. Other August activities on campus include a week-long painting retreat with Carol Douglas, an introduction to the biodiversity monitoring app iNaturalist on the 7th, and also this Friday, and bird carving with Wendell Gilly Museum carver Jim Vicassi on the 4th and 18th. So thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.